You mentioned that the planning group reported up through a different organization than the fab manager. So was it the case that the fab manager just said, you're going to do this? Or did you have to have discussions with that overall organization? How did that work?
For myself, I did it at the more at the local level with the fab planning manager, and but the factory manager, he actually took that up higher and got buy-in across the board. Now, I'm not gonna say it was a pleasant conversation with the planning group, but it was one that actually he had the reputation and the influence that he was able to pull that off.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things I tell people when they're having these conversations is there are things that you should be passionate about and you should be, maybe pounding on the table about. What happens is people sometimes are just pounding on the table about anything like, oh, we need to make starts. Well, I mean, really, do you need to make starts? And so, the fact that you have hard conversations, at least you've got data and, you have the basic science that says, look, this is what's going to happen. It's predictable, which tends to make those conversations, they, like you say, they might not like it, but it's kind of hard to argue with the science.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So that was kind of, so we're going to do this. We start moderating the starts. Planning is not happy because now they can't have all they can eat, but they work with you. Where to go from there? What kind of things do you see and where did you get to?
So the first thing we did is I had a couple of our critical resources that were reporting into me was I had two industrial engineers that were very strong and they were kind of self-learners too. I gave each of them a copy of the factory physics book and we had those conversations. I had another resource was I had an intern from the MIT leaders for manufacturing and stuff. So we were meeting together. We met every morning. We were working on what we called our starts protocol. So we started really developing that and refining it and building a system. So we would know exactly every week this tool, we were running this process and we were reviewing it every morning to see, does this make sense? Does it not make sense on what we're doing? Based on the last week's output and the current output that we're getting, does it make sense for us to start this many wafers? Does it make sense to start this mix of wafers? Things like that. And so we continued, and those two IEs continued to refine that system, and it was giant Excel spreadsheets the way it started. We ended up automating it, but it became a very valuable tool in guiding us on how we were going to have this ability to ramp the factory inventory down to what we thought we needed to, and to be able to run. And as we started doing this, we started finding, okay, we're flushing out the old inventory, we have organizational alignment across the board, working on what I say all the sources of variability. What's the operational sources of variability? Why are tools idle when they should be up and running? Was preventative maintenance taking longer than expected? Why is this tool down unexpectedly? Availability problems. Why is this process having problems? Why are we having to do all this rework? Things like that. The whole organization was rallied around it. Now there was also work that the engineers had to do that was preparing us for long term, looking a lot of at the yield data, different things like that. But what we started seeing as the factory started running faster, suddenly we're starting to get our yields parametrically at the back end of the line are starting to get better and better because inventory is spending less time in the factory. And that was one of the key learnings that I had